Wow. Has another week gone by so quick? A lot of things have happened. Here we are again, trying to solve the world's problems, talking about things we know nothing about. If you think we know anything about what we're discussing, you ought to have your head examined. Gents, what are we drinking this week? Must we ask you? Okay. Do we have to?
No. I'm trying out Rooibos. I'm not really a fan, but I've been encouraged to try out Rooibos.
You're fans that like Rooibos?
Turns out, and that's what I'm.
He has fans.
Not fans, but people that follow the show, and so I'm trying out.
So the
Rooibos.
country uses foreign currency importing that stuff.
It's way cheaper than your brandy, whiskey, whatever that is.
But utility-wise, is it a wise idea?
Because we get results from this.
What results do you get from that?
Okay, so I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but this is a rabbit hole you're going, and you know what I suggest you do is just stick to your brandy, whiskey, whatever that is, and let's move on.
You know, I have a feeling you're creeping in on my moderator powers. I sense a coup coming, but anyway, okay.
Very soon.
Shumba.
Yeah, today we're drinking rum, spiced rum from France. Something different.
Good use of foreign currency.
Fantastic use of foreign currency. I was introduced to this by a friend, and I've never looked back. I used to have a dim view of rum, because most people adulterate it with things as awful as Coca-Cola, but this is actually good enough to drink neat on ice, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, we've been to the bottom of a few bottles of this over the years,
Absolutely.
and no regrets. Eh?
Cheers.
Cheers.
What's the difference between rum and everything else?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of things.
That's like a whole season.
Okay. This is not grain based. It's mostly made from sugarcane. It's basically so they ferment the sugarcane and then they distill it. Whereas brandy is
So
basically
why are we
wine.
importing it?
Very good question. Very, very good question.
Why are we
a few weeks
importing
ago, we talked about productivity and productive sectors, and
So what would be the equivalent in some
of
rum?
no, we can make rum.
So
Because we make a ton of sugarcane.
We don't make rum.
We don't make.
I'm not aware of any rum. We make a bit of cane spirit. Okay. So most of our cheap spirits in this country come from ethanol, which is a cane spirit. So when they make sugar in Cherezi, they dedicate a small amount of the sugar to the manufacture of ethanol. So they distill the sugar, they come up with nearly pure alcohol. I think around 99.6% or something like that. Alcohol. Some of that goes into fuel, and some of it goes into the making of cane spirits. Or spirits. So a lot of the low-end spirits you get are basically
Based. Okay.
ethanol diluted and flavored. So some of the cheaper whiskeys are not whiskeys, they are whiskey flavored ethanol,
Oh, okay.
or brandy flavored ethanol, basically.
And technically, ethanol is basically alcohol.
Yeah, it is.
It's pure alcohol, or very, very close to pure alcohol.
Okay.
But I mean, this is more artisanal.
And the market, does the market appreciate rum? There's a mobile market.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
we consume quite a lot of rum, I suspect.
okay.
And
From
rum
what I've seen
flavored
in my
things and
demographic.
cane cane spirit kind of things. Yeah.
Interesting.
But there's absolutely no reason there's absolutely no reason we should import this, given we're one of the biggest exporters of sugar in the world.
What we don't have the expertise.
We have the best tobacco in the world. We don't export cigars either, which is Cuba's mainstay. But we grow better tobacco than they do.
Is it not a question of the type of tobacco we produce?
To an extent, yes. Most of the tobacco we produce is Virginia, which is fuel cured. It's very light. I don't smoke, but I know quite a bit of it. It's very light and very flavorful. It's not as dark as the Burleys and the Oriental tobaccos that go into
That's what I
your-
thought. Yeah,
But
cigar
we
making.
do have parts of the country, such as the Burma Valley, that can produce the dark and heavy tobaccos, and have for years.
Okay.
But we've actually stopped producing it because we didn't know what to do with it.
No.
I mean, it takes us down an interesting rabbit hole on value addition and beneficiation, which I know Shumba here is very passionate about, and whether it's a good idea or not. But
Look, I think if you have a free market, right, the market will tell us whether it makes sense to beneficiate or not. I don't think what I'm opposed to is this idea that you have a bureaucrat in an ivory tower pontificating about what we should beneficiate and why and how. But I think if you have an open economy, right, the market will figure it out. If certain things make sense to beneficiate, they will be beneficiated. If they don't, they won't.
Absolutely.
now, talking about what makes sense and what doesn't. One of our biggest export earners is diaspora remittances. I know we keep coming back to it, but perhaps this week we should go in depth into it. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but we get about a quarter of our foreign currency from diaspora remittances, and about a quarter of our population is in the diaspora. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I mean,
more or less. Yeah.
you're the sober one. You're the one who reads.
Yeah, more or less. You're right.
This is a good thing.
It's a good and bad thing. It's good because a lot of these remittances are for its welfare support. So it's a safety net in Zimbabwe. So without it, God knows how bad the situation would be. And with it, I think we somewhat alleviate the dangers and the poverty that's already in the country. So I would say that's our safety net, that's our welfare. And that is good, but it's also problematic when you read through the studies. It's also problematic when it's not productive. So when it's consumptive, what tends to happen is it only comes to Zimbabwe as a stopgap measure and eventually ends up back in the country.
Outside the country.
Outside the country, wherever it's come from. So it just comes in and it goes out. And it's purely consumptive.
So a quarter of our forex earnings are really coming because people are scared that their mom is going to starve.
Principally, that's the issue.
But can they be said to be earnings? Because so if a mine exports, if a farm that grows tobacco exports, it's literally earning income from production here in Zimbabwe. But if somebody in the diaspora is sending money to a relative here, is that earnings or is that a donation? Is that manna from heaven?
So technically, you're right. They call it free funds. So remittances, they call them free flows. But George is right because we made the investment. So you're talking about an individual who, for most part, if you think about it, has gone through the education system in Zim and has been healthcare. They've been supported. So it is earnings because this individual is now productive elsewhere.
But you're assuming the state paid for this. What if their parents?
No, it's not the state. I think as the nation, right? This was an individual who was educated, yeah. We would equally say the same if the Chinese were sending their kids to be educated in America, right? And then go back to China.
Well, I think a better example is an avocado tree. If you planted an avocado tree and you fed it and you kept it healthy until it started producing avocados and you exported them, how is that different from
precisely?
Yeah, except if we're going to use the avocado tree analogy, you've basically exported the avocado tree and it's producing avocados over there, not here.
The grandparent.
But we're getting good example. So that applies interestingly with avocados in a reverse scenario. So the biggest variety of avocados we export here is called Hass, which comes from another country. I can't remember which one right now. But for every avocado we export, we pay a royalty to the people that bred
the grandparent.
The grandparent.
Okay.
So it is. I think, in fact, looking at it from George's perspective, if policymakers were to look at it that way, then they would start actually doing a whole lot more in terms of what we're exporting. These people are principally
But why is
Zimbabweans.
it any of the business of policymakers?
Well, it is the business of policymakers because with just one thing, if they change the policy to ensure that diaspora and remittances stay in Zim, you're talking about, let's say on average, $1 billion staying in Zim. Because right now what's happening is this money is coming in, but if $1 billion were to stay in Zim, and it's
So, but
for
you
the
need to
next
explain
10
why.
years.
You need to explain why you say it's
And
going
you
out.
believe government should intervene and
sorry,
make
no.
the money stay in Zim?
Sorry, Rufaro, I think there's a point we're missing, or we're not explaining to the audience here. So you say the money's going out again. What do you mean? So my mom gets $200 from my sister who's in South Africa. What do you mean the money goes out again?
Because of the current policies, what tends to happen is Zimbabweans within the country, the only way they're sending their money, their savings outside of the country is they're using diaspora and remittances, because you can only get currency. If you're in Zimbabwe, you can only get currency. Suppose you're earning in Zim dollars or your business is earning in Zim dollars. You can only get currency on the para market. You can't get currency on the auction, right? If you want to take your savings out of Zimbabwe. And the only way you can take your savings out of Zimbabwe is through remittances that are coming into Zimbabwe.
So I do a deal with my sister and say, you want me to give some,
Yeah, but
you want to pay mom's Zesa bill and whatever, I'll pay, but can you
Put it in my account that's offshore.
Yeah, but you speak as if there's a huge constituency of Zimbabweans that's trying to save offshore. I don't think that's the case.
And I tend to agree with you, but I agree with him and you. But I think it's not the people that are trying to save offshore, but I think it's our lack of manufacturing sector. So my mom gets her $200, but she goes into the supermarket and buys a whole lot of foreign brands, and that money goes back out again.
The manufacturing sector would take part of, but it's not really the problem, because that money is actually going into the system, and that's what we would want. But I'm surprised that you're underestimating Zimbabweans moving their money out. And I'll give a good
I don't have
example.
any money to move out.
Well, let's simplify it. You see,
You're a bad
when you guys
anecdote.
when you guys think of moving money out, we're talking about small amounts, $200, $300 that people will keep offshore. And I'll give you a very good example. If you look at the property market in Zim, right, a lot of that money eventually ends up outside. It's people who, first of all, are actually moving out, and second of all, are taking their savings out. And then the other thing is, because of our tertiary education in Zim, you tend to find that a lot of people are moving and going to universities outside the country. And that's one way in which we're taking money out.
So it's all
the
getting
money.
paid.
It's
So my
getting
sister
paid.
pays my daughter's school fees. Okay, but
Or the other point is we keep it under
mattresses, which is a form of externalization.
It is actually a form of external. Well, I hate using that word externalization. It's not externalization, because this is someone's money. It's just not in
that's your right-wing
our formal.
lingo.
It's not in our
mine.
formal sectors. So why you're a banker, you would appreciate this. Imagine you have $1 billion in terms of deposits staying in the country, because when I'm taking my money into South Africa and I keep it in South Africa, it's in the South African financial services. Now imagine if that money was staying in our financial services here, and that's $1 billion a year. I've just used roughly that 50% will always go back, right? But 50% stays. So if $1 billion was to stay in Zim, over a 10-year period, you're looking at deposits, just purely from the remittances, you're looking at $10 billion.
That's okay.
I think I'm just making a point.
Okay.
I mean, it could be even, remember at our peak, in terms of pure deposits, we had about, I think, $4 billion, of which $2 billion was, actual
in nostro offshore, like real money.
real money. And we had a growing economy. So if our policies, going back to Rufaro's argument, if our policies were right, what would happen is this money would stay in Zimbabwe. And if the money stayed in Zimbabwe, then the bankers would do what they do best, which is aggregate it and put it into entrepreneurs, manufacturing, whatever it is, and then the economy grows.
Okay,
So that's why policy matters.
We've got to go to a break now, but maybe before we go to the break, I'd like to ask you a question which you can answer afterwards, both of you. So, if we get this $1.5 billion from diaspora remittances, which are basically our friends and relatives sending money to look after their mum, after they've paid their rent, their school fees, bought their groceries offshore, would we not be better if our friends and relatives were here and they were paying their rent, buying their groceries, and paying their school fees here, rather than sending us the change? But maybe we'll go away for a couple of minutes, top up our drinks. He needs to freshen up, powder his nose, and we'll take it from there when we come back. Welcome back. Your nose doesn't look too powdered though. But anyway, welcome back, whatever you were doing out there. Just before we went away, I had posed a question to you. Are we not better off with the diasporans here? Is it a good thing for us that they're out there?
Okay, so let's unpack that, right? Why did they leave in the first instance? Would they not, if they could achieve the same economic outcomes here at home in Zimbabwe, would they have left in the first instance, right? So I think that your question is a misnomer. These people would never have left if they could do what they're doing in the diaspora at home. So it's not so much, so they didn't make a choice of, I can do this in Zimbabwe or I can do this in UK or South Africa. They could not do it here. So they had to leave. If our economy was doing better and they could achieve all those outcomes here, they would never have left. Right? So it's a false dichotomy that, are we better off or not? They left because they did not have the opportunity here.
So we should just change things and they come back and we'll be better off.
I think we'll be better off if we had a thriving economy in which most of our talented people would choose to stay.
Okay.
I'm just extending his argument.
You agree?
Partially. I disagree.
It hurts you to say I agree.
No, I agree, but I'm extending his argument.
Yeah.
But it's just that I'm just going to take a very drastic argument that I would like to hear what you guys think. If we look at the growth of the Zimbabwean economy, so suppose we were growing properly and things politically had been okay, I think that we would still be a net exporter of people.
Why?
For a number of reasons. So, for example, people who are ambitious enough, I don't think that Zimbabwean financial services would have been as big or as glamorous as the Johannesburg financial services. So a lot of our people would still have chosen to be in Johannesburg.
Or the very, like the 0.1% percentile that could actually thrive in a New York, in a London, in a Joburg.
So the thing about being a small economy is just, we just don't have enough opportunities. It's just the consequence of being in a small economy. That's why people in America move from small cities and they go to New York. It's not that there's no financial services in some of the little small states. It's just that you naturally want to be where the big boys are. So if you look at London,
where is Warren Buffett based?
They push. Let's not take the extreme cases, right? Let's take
one of the richest men in the world. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So let's take just the normal course. Is just people are naturally ambitious, and the nature of a small economy is that you cannot contain those people, right? So the first thing that would happen. So eventually the people would come back. But the first thing that would happen is they will see opportunities elsewhere. This is the highest.
But I think
that a greater proportion. And let's talk about the 80%.
but-
I was going to differentiate
It's not even
between the
80%, George.
highly skilled and the lowly
it's the
skilled.
0.1% because
No,
the
let's talk about the
Zimbabwean
middle.
So the first thing is, what I wanted to do in my argument is to talk about the highly skilled individuals and the lowly skilled individuals.
But let's
What
talk
would
about the
have
middle.
happened?
Let's talk about the middle.
Well, the middle tend to be highly skilled, because remember, middle class. So the rich in any economy would always stay within the country because they're already making enough money. They see no reason to
Are
go
they not
outside.
ambitious? Do they not want to make it in New York?
Well, they tend to make more money within the state. That's just the nature of things, right? The more ambitious people tend to be in the middle. So it's the guy who went to a good school, went to university. So the first thing is, which university are you going to go to in Zimbabwe? They will tend to go to South African universities or even, far out. We've seen this with the Chinese, right? That a lot of the middle Chinese people eventually end up in America. They never go back. Although substantial now are going back because the economy in China is growing.
And Trump's anti-immigration policies and
That
rhetoric.
that too. So if we were to take the original argument I wanted to make is, suppose the economy was growing, the nature of the state, the sort of investment we had made in our education policy is such that those people could only satiate their ambitions abroad. There is no two ways about it. That whole middle was always going to leave because you had educated these people, and Zimbabwe is just too small for them, right? They would want to be where the big boys are, and that skill will be in high demand anyway.
Let's
look at a pilot.
in
Yeah,
other
but what
words-
percentile of our population falls into that?
Look,
No,
so what Tinashe is
I
saying,
wanted to make
what Tinashe is saying
arguments.
is you've got 500, 1,000 engineers graduating every year. Maybe the economy can make 150 jobs. The other
This is when it's
350 to-
growing.
The other 350 to 850.
We're always going to leave. And it was a good thing that you were producing excess engineers. It's not a bad thing to be producing excess engineers, right? But once you've produced these individuals, is your economy big enough? It was never going to be big enough because we had invested. I think that people take for granted the education policies from the 1950s. So it's not really 1980s, but the education policies from the 1950s that changed a whole generation of individuals, right? And if you look at South Africa was going the other way from the 70s to the 80s, and Zimbabwe was going one way in terms of education policies. Yes, indeed, after independence, it then even expanded even more. So you're developing these individuals, but because you're a small country, you're always going to export more.
I'm going to interrupt.
This is upper.
Okay. Can
Then
you
the
explain
lower
to-
classes.
I'm gonna interrupt there. So Zimbabwe was doing the right things. What were those right things that we did?
Education and health.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of education, what did we do?
The polytechnics. So we built up a big polytechnic system and apprenticeships from the 50s, actually. And if you read through into the 70s and the 80s, that was the right thing that we were doing. We were building on technical skills. So you had two kinds of people. You had the artisanal skill set, and then you had the engineers, the highly skilled set, and we were developing those.
Okay, so you had a lot of plumbers, mechanics, carpenters, and so on,
Boilermakers.
boilermakers,
Yeah.
and then a very thin class of engineers.
More than our
okay.
access to our requirements.
I'm going to chime in here and disagree slightly because I think that if you look at a country like Singapore, right, it's also a small economy. It's got a small population, less than 6 million people. They have no natural resources, but they
They have
grew
a lot of water.
seawater. Are you
Yes.
kidding? Right, but they managed to grow their economy at a rapid enough clip to retain all of that talent and to actually import talent. So in Asia today, Singapore is actually it's a financial hub, right? There's Singapore, there's Hong Kong, right? Those are the major financial hubs in that part of the world. So I think that,
But can I
Well, he hasn't made his
reply
point.
that?
so my
He's
point
made
is,
his point, which
no,
he
no,
hasn't
no,
yet.
no, no,
He
no,
hasn't.
Okay.
He hasn't
So,
made his point.
so my point is the fact that the top quartile of engineers, doctors, accountants, lawyers, the highly skilled Zimbabweans left is not so much a function of our economy being small and these individuals being ambitious and wanting to shine elsewhere. It's because we didn't experience that growth that a place like Singapore experienced, that accommodated all this talent, absorbed it, and even imported more, right? We actually we made some strategic policy mistakes that led to a economic growth trajectory that made what you're saying true. So our economy...
So in other words, if there was enough money going around that enough people were building houses, plumbers would stay here and
I don't think so.
houses.
I don't think so. And
Is that correct?
I hear your argument, and it's a valid argument, but I think that you're starting on level or step 2. You've missed the step 1. Step 1 is a lot of the people who went into Singapore were coming from Malaysia, right? And these were the excesses. These were the engineers. These were
all the Singaporeans had jobs.
These were the point I'm making is this: that don't start at level 2. Start at level 1. What happened?
No, but
in
level
stage
0,
one.
level no. So you
Oh,
started.
so
no.
let me make my
Okay, 0 minus 1. But
yeah. Let me
also
make my
started in the
argument. Let me make my argument, George. I think he's getting the point that I'm trying to make. That
No, I'm not.
you're not. Okay. So let me clarify that Singapore is a byproduct of what was happening in Malaysia, and the policies that you had in Singapore that would ensure that you are continuously growing and attracting talent did not exist in Malaysia. And not to say that Malaysia wasn't growing. It was growing, but it has structural issues such that these highly technical skills would always move out. Highly technical business people were always
Singapore
going to
set itself up to catch them.
to catch them. That's really what they were doing. So what you're now doing is you're analyzing what's happening within Singapore. But Singapore was already structured in such a way from ground zero to be a net importer and be
So the
extremely
I don't think that
attractive.
nullifies his argument.
Yeah,
No, that's why I said I'm only starting. We need to first contextualize. Now, coming back to Zim, there was no way that Zim could be a Singapore, because structurally it was already problematic.
So we're in
Right.
India.
We're a Malaysia. So I'm saying in the normal course of development,
So you're making my point for me.
no, hear me out. I'm saying Zimbabwe, without its problems, would have been, its growth trajectory would have been a Malaysia. Not a Singapore.
Or
It would
in
have been-
India.
Or in India. That
Why
no
not?
matter what you
Why
do,
couldn't we not have been a Singapore?
because from ground zero,
Because Singapore didn't start with surplus labor.
yeah.
No. But gentlemen,
I'm not saying that. That's what he's saying.
Lee Kuan Yew engineered the Singapore story, and he put in place a policy framework that allowed it to take off. Yeah, it's not like Singapore was naturally disposed to being a phenomenal growth story.
But he's saying at the starting point, take Singapore, take Malaysia, take okay. I understand why India is a bad example, but let's take India. Singapore was in a different position because at the starting point, it didn't have surplus labor.
It is actually more entrepreneurial kind of. So the people who are in Singapore, or at that particular moment in time when Lee Kuan Yew came in, Chinese, Indian, and Malay, who had gone to Malaysia.
Yeah, but what moved the needle?
Who had migrated into Malaysia, because the nature of the Malaysian economy, they moved out of Malaysia and moved to Singapore.
Yes. So what moved the needle? Was Singapore naturally disposed to attract these people, or did Lee Kuan Yew do certain things that made Singapore attractive?
No, but I think, Rufaro, where you are missing Trash's point. He's not saying that Singapore did bad things or that Singapore didn't do good things. But he's saying it's not a good case study for us. A better case study for us is a Malaysia or an India that are starting in the same position that we started. Well, we started in the same position.
But we actually started in a better position. Do you know that in 1965 our economy was bigger?
Yes,
than
but
Singapore?
by 1980, according to Tinashe, we were producing surplus labor.
Even in the 60s, we were already producing.
No, that's because after UDI, a lot of the white community actually wanted to leave.
The-
And we had exchange control policy designed specifically to discourage immigration.
I'm saying our histories are more aligned to Malaysia than they are to Singapore.
I think we're down a rabbit hole now. And maybe it's a good time
To take another break.
to take another break. And maybe when we come back, we'll move the discussion on to perhaps what we should do, given where we are. See you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Just before we went for the break, we were going down another rabbit hole about the Singapore model, the India model, the Malaysia model. But I'm going to call time on that. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Let's go back to our problem. We've got this 1.5 billion, call it, coming from the diaspora. It's pretty useful for us. How do we grow this number to 7-8 billion?
So it turns out that the one skill set that's actually in high demand that's coming from Zimbabwe are your technical skills, your boiler makers, plumbers, electricians, graduates that come from our polytechnics. And I think what we need to do is to get a lot more graduates coming from our polytechnics and exporting them to South Africa and Botswana. You know, there's a gap when you look at South Africa, Australia, Botswana. There's a gap of that technical skill. And the useful anecdote I was bringing out is I know that there are a lot of South Africans who would go out of their way to bring in a boiler maker from Zimbabwe, but they will not go out of their way to bring in a bank manager from Zimbabwe. So I think that our universities, where we are getting it wrong, is we need to focus more and more on our polytechnics and produce more and more technical graduates. The least that will happen with a technical graduate is they will work for themselves. But if you're producing more and more of these university graduates, is they have to be employable. But unfortunately, the economy is not growing. And the thing about humanities is that, or even commerce graduates like ourselves, it's also dangerous to be producing people who are commerce graduates, and yet the economy is not growing. And
Who
yet,
do they manage?
Yeah. So you
Whose money do they count?
you bring up something quite interesting in my mind, because the problem is that you have a state education system. Perhaps the grants aren't there as much, but it's significantly subsidized. That you have quite a lot. The throughput is not small of people doing these courses that in the real world have no value, right? And the problem is that you have a bureaucrat in an ivory tower deciding that we should build this university and it should have these faculties and they should teach these things. And I think the solution is for the state to actually get out of that business and leave it to the market. Because if I'm an entrepreneur in the education space, I'm going to create a curriculum, a course that will lead to more and more people wanting to come to my institution. And the smartest way that I can create demand for my educational institution is if I can sell to my potential customers that they're all going to get meaningful, sustainable jobs.
there's a moral hazard if it's driven by the education institutions themselves, if you don't change society.
If it's for profit.
If it's for profit, so
what's the moral hazard?
The moral hazard is what's happening in America with the universities, right? That the price just continues to go up.
No, but I think you're getting something fundamentally wrong there with the US, because in the US, it's crony capitalism where, number one,
that's the moral hazard I'm talking about.
No, but I'm not.
A few weeks ago, we said there was no such thing as crony capitalism.
No, we didn't say that.
No, we didn't say that.
We said it's cronyism.
we said cronyism can exist in capitalism as well as in socialism.
So the problem in the US is that you've got a policy framework where you can borrow to go to university, right, and do things that are totally useless, right? And the university that's teaching that course can always claw back that money from you. Like, even if you go through bankruptcy, you still owe for your student debt. That's why they have a student debt crisis, because the private educational sector has captured the state.
You're in a rabbit hole. Makes the point.
Yeah. So
I'm getting his point, and he's making a very good point. But I don't think that's the point.
As long as the private institutions in education can fail. So if they teach the wrong thing, and students take those courses, they graduate, they can't get jobs,
they don't pay their fees.
And then
So this is in one instance where I actually give the government of Zimbabwe a pass. That the problem is not the government of Zimbabwe.
Am I hearing this?
Yeah, I don't think the problem is society. So if you look at American society, I was reading some data points that were quite interesting. That women in America will only date somebody who has a master's degree, right? That's a society thing. That society has made it so important that one should have a master's degree, right? So it doesn't really matter what that degree is. So it's less to do with the government policy, but it's society's values. That society continuously values a university education when it shouldn't. So what we need to change is society's
I beg to differ,
value.
but finish. Make
But
your
okay,
point.
but I think we're going down a rabbit hole. We're still going back to how to increase diaspora.
What I'm saying
so you're
is,
saying let's teach people how to do things.
if parents
how to do useful things.
Absolutely, that's how Germany did it. If parents, for example, you have a kid who's just finished his O levels and has not done as well in his sciences, but has done phenomenally well in his humanities subjects, they tend to say, oh, okay, why don't you go with the humanities subjects so that you can go into university? What they should be saying is actually become a tradesperson. You can always pick up commerce and humanities later on, but become a tradesperson, because that's going to be extremely useful. And that has nothing to do with the government of Zimbabwe. So if you look at the people who are going to the Polytechnic, it's got nothing to do with the government of Zimbabwe. It's about people applying, right? The people who have...
I beg to differ with you, Tinashe.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that...
Go for it.
So
Do you doubt that the American woman would rather date...
No, I think you're being
and even if he's not,
No, I'm just having fun with...
I'm sorry to report that I haven't done research on who American women are. And I'm unlikely to in the foreseeable future. But okay, look, I hear your point, but I beg to differ with you, and I'm surprised that you make this point as somebody who loves looking at markets and economies, because I think that fundamentally what is universal across the globe is people want better quality of life, they want higher income, they want to achieve higher levels of wealth. We can agree with it on that without controversy, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the professions that lead or that are known to increase your probability of achieving those things are going to attract more people naturally. Mm. But I think there's a false narrative, and this is now driven by marketing, because the universities in a place like the US have a perverse incentive to recruit people, because they know that whether they're selling something that adds value to your life or
guys,
not.
I think we're going down a rabbit hole about American education. What do we need to do here? Tinashe is saying let's teach people how to do things.
Yeah,
we agree with that.
I'm saying it's a cultural problem.
I don't think it's a cultural problem.
I'm not, because that's where you're going, that the culture is saying get a degree. It's not saying what kind of degree you should get.
Because fundamentally the culture is saying make money.
But
Sorry?
okay.
I think fundamentally what the culture is saying
is make money.
And the culture doesn't care whether you've got a master's degree, a PhD. It cares about...
Okay, but you guys
no, the culture is...
I don't know where you guys are missing the question. The point is, what must we do? You're saying, and I hear your answer is clear. Teach people how to do things. And if they can do things, whether they can fix lights or fix toilets, other countries will demand them.
So here's
What are
a
you
simple,
saying?
So my model is different. My model is make education for profit and make them defer their revenue. So one of the ways they can demonstrate that they are teaching you something useful that will help you generate income, right? Is to say, okay, fine.
So you agree with him? Teach people how to do something useful.
Yes.
What you're suggesting is how universities should attract people to want to learn useful things.
Yes. So
And that's
so
where
they
I
should
differ
say
with them.
they should say, number one, pay a deposit, but we have so much conviction that we're teaching you something useful that when you graduate and you go out into the market, we know you're going to make enough money to be able to pay us.
But in the meantime,
George, can I just come in here before
I
you
don't
can
know.
get in?
No, because you guys are
No, because
you're
I
completely
need
losing
to.
everybody else.
No.
Let's just clarify a simple thing, which you're actually both saying, which I think is a very
No, I'm not, because I want to address.
No, you don't know what I'm
these
going to say. You guys are saying something which is actually a very useful thing, and I think you're in agreement with it, which is let's get people to learn how to do things that other countries value.
That's not what he's saying, and I want to help him to get to that line of thinking. Is that there's a dangerous incentive, there's a moral hazard with universities. Universities are not there to give you a job. They're there
But you guys are going into the
to get in. No, because if he understands that, so he's saying for profit, right? And I'm saying universities
but you guys
are
are going
not.
to- you
There's
guys are
no
going to a rabbit
incentive.
hole tonight.
There's no incentive whatsoever for a university to give you a job. In fact, you're quite
I'm not
right.
saying the university should give you a job.
Where you're quite right is if in the university there was a terms or condition that said if I don't get a job in 5 years, I should demand my money back, then the system would work. But there's no incentive for a university to give you a job. The incentive for a university, and that's why they
You
are.
guys are actually saying the same thing too.
Yeah, but then
That's what he's saying.
exactly. But I'm saying there's no incentive. He's saying for profit. If schooling was for profit, then it would naturally.
No, you guys are being.
India.
You guys are being. You
He's
guys are
being pedantic. I'm
But
not
you
being
guys are actually
pedantic.
saying the same thing. You guys are saying, if we want to grow our diaspora remittances, we've got to change our educational system, or change the focus of our educational system to
Useful things.
technical skills.
It doesn't matter whether they're technical
And
or
you guys are
otherwise.
actually in agreement that one of the reasons that that's not happening is that universities have no, or all our tertiary institutions have no incentive to do so. And we need to revise
Because they are run by a bureaucrat in an ivory tower who has no idea what's
So
happening
Lucy
in the
is not a
market.
state university. Africa University is not a state university.
Okay,
and
okay.
and they're
Lucy is.
not, and they're still producing the same graduates that are coming out of state universities.
Actually, there was a recent survey that was done.
UZ is much better than
There was actually a recent survey that was done, which showed that NAST and Africa University students were more employment ready than all the others.
They're still producing. The issue that I want to bring out is AU is not producing technical skills. It's still producing in terms of number of graduates and the type of skills that they're producing. They're producing exactly what the state is producing. That's why I say it's not a state problem, but it's a cultural problem.
But how is it
If we
funded?
change the culture,
But I think
if we change
but
the
I think again
culture,
you're being pedantic. The point is you both agree
That's his nature.
that the universities need to change, and they need to change.
I don't think the
They need to
universities need to
change.
change. I think society needs to change.
Okay, you're talking about how the university change will be driven. It will be driven by
By
society.
society. If the society changes, the university will change. Whether it's state or it's private, it will change.
And he's saying that universities will respond to society depending on their revenue model.
And I'm saying right
So
now,
if
you
a
do have private
university
universities.
is inoculated or is somehow insulated or disparate from the market of the job market, right? Then they don't care because the revenue is going to come through.
But how you get them to the job market is if students can demand their money back.
Okay, that's a new discussion. That's a very new discussion.
Then you take away the moral hazard.
But I think that if an institution is for profit in the first instance, it's much more likely to be sensitive to a student's post-graduation life than if it was getting money from the state, right? And
a
it had to
clever
run.
university panders to the culture. That's the market. I will pander to the market. If the market is telling
No. But if an entrepreneur enters that market and he's creating people who earn, he will clean up, or she will clean up.
Gentlemen, I think we are somewhere in Wonderland. And this is a very good moment to say good night to our viewers and let ourselves
Get more spiced.
enjoy more of this stuff, which seems to have what's the word for those mushrooms that make you see stars?
I
don't want to say
LCD?
Okay, we don't even go psychedelic powers. It looks like Spicy Tail's got psychedelic powers. So this is a good time to say goodnight to our viewers. It's been lovely having you along with us. Enjoy your weekend. Think about some of the things we've been discussing. See if you and yours can come up with better ways to run the world. Be good. If you can't be good at it. But while you're thinking about being good at it, one is reminded of Machiavelli. Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number that are not good. Stay safe. COVID is real. Have a nice weekend.